Okay, thank you all for joining. Let's get it going. Please let me know in the comments that you can hear me okay, and we'll take it from there. Cool. We got the green light from you guys, so let's get this started. First of all, thank you for joining this stream. I know there's a lot of places you can watch this, so I appreciate it. Some breaking news as of right now from Axios and CNN. They've just reported that the January 6th committee is going to invite Ginny Thomas to come speak to the committee. That was after yesterday's revelation that they had found emails between Ginny Thomas and John Eastman. John Eastman is the Trump-aligned lawyer who is helping create this strategy for Pence to refuse to certify the election results. So hopefully, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, Ginny Thomas voluntarily goes. Otherwise, we'll see if they actually have the spine to subpoena her. So we'll see what happens on that front. But that is good news, because if the tables were turned and like Ginny Thomas was actually the significant other of a liberal justice and conspired with some whack job lawyers to help overturn the election for a Democrat, dear God, imagine what we would be hearing on Fox on a daily basis. Starting with Fox and Friends at like 5 in the morning, it would be Ginny Thomas all day long, and it would go until Tucker and Hannity and Ingram. I mean, we would be hearing it on an endless loop, seared into these people's brains the same way that they vilify any boogeyman that they choose, right? Any Hillary Clinton, any George Soros, or whoever it is, Anthony Fauci. Like, that really kind of does bring into full focus the asymmetry between the two parties, because Republicans will choose somebody to vilify and make them, responsible for all of the woes in the entire universe. And Democrats, on the other extreme, on the other end of that spectrum, will see some overt criminality happening in broad daylight, where the wife of a sitting Supreme Court justice, who just so happens to rule against any cases, in the negative, and in any cases where Trump's insurrectionist behavior is involved, they see that and they're like, I don't know, man, should we even call her to testify? So thank God they've decided to call her to testify. I think that when we do have that, with that being said, I'll criticize what I just said, in the sense that when we do have that defeatist attitude and don't apply pressure to these Democrats, nothing will happen. But on the flip side, when there is a lot of pressure applied, because when that story did break yesterday and everyone was like, call her to testify, anybody on the right would call this person to testify if the tables were turned. Call this woman to testify. Less than 24 hours, we have an announcement that she is being called to testify. So, pressure like that bursts pipes. And I think it's important that the pressure does stay up, because obviously people are listening. I don't know if it's thanks to all that pressure on the outside, or just because it is the obvious right thing to do. But in any case, Ginny Thomas, they have announced that she will be called or invited to voluntarily speak with the committee. If and when she refuses, we'll see what happens. It would be ironic too if she did refuse, as the wife of a Supreme Court justice, to get called to testify and be like, the law doesn't apply to me, which would be the ultimate form of irony. In that case, we'll see what happens if she does get subpoenaed, and if, even more interesting, if she refuses a subpoena. Wouldn't be surprising, but it would be actually pretty fitting. So, okay. Let's see what else we have. So yesterday, the biggest story was on June 14th. Republican Representative Barry Loudermilk, just this Republican congressman, who had been accused of giving a tour in the Capitol on January 5th. He came out and he tweeted, The truth will always prevail. As I've said since the January 6th committee made their baseless accusation against me in the media, I never gave a tour of the Capitol on January 5th, 2021. Cut 2. One day after he tweeted that, the January 6th committee releases a video showing him giving a tour in the Capitol on January 5th, 2021. So I guess at this point, like, it's really worth asking Barry Loudermilk, why lie? Like, what are you trying to hide? If everything is on the level, why try to bury the fact that you did lead a tour with people who would ultimately end up seeking to assassinate a bunch of Democratic officials, which I think I answered my own question. Obviously, in the video that the January 6th committee released, there were images of Loudermilk leading this tour of, I don't know who they were, just his guests through the Capitol. And then it showed those same guests in their own videos making their way, at the January 6th Stop the Steal rally, making their way to the Capitol. One of these guys had an American flagpole with the top of it fastened into like a spear. He like made some homemade shiv, like the MAGA version of a prison shiv on the end of his flagpole. And obviously we've seen flagpoles used as weapons before. On January 6th, there's like a really famous image of these insurrectionists beating a police officer, bludgeoning a police officer with the blunt end of a flagpole. So, just kind of ironic how even if there was no coordination between people who created their weapons on January 6th, just kind of ironic how all of these people, independent of one another, looked at a flagpole and was like, there's my weapon. That's the weapon I'm going to use. The American flag, that seems great so that I can bludgeon somebody on the left. Just kind of like this unconscious, like synchronicity between all these MAGA Republicans who just like find the darkest, most depraved weaponry that they can find, fastening like some prison shiv out of an American flag. So in any case, we have this video of these guests who were in the U.S. Capitol and also, talking about attacking a bunch of Democratic lawmakers. They talked about attacking Pelosi and Schumer, Jerry Nadler, and AOC, so the Democratic leadership and a big faction of the New York leadership, just high-profile Democrats in general. And that video also showed, I think most importantly, a bunch of these guests of Loudermilk taking photos of like areas in the Capitol where it's not customary to take photos, and you can see them taking photos of security checkpoints. You can see them taking photos of doorways and stairwells. One lawmaker on the Democratic side came out, and that was Congressman Boyle from Philly, and he said, "This is the stairwell I take to my office." This is in response to a still image of a video of one of Loudermilk's guests taking a photo of some random stairwell. Quote, "This is the stairwell I take to my office. In my 8 years here, I've never seen a tourist taking pictures of it." So, and look, I'm not in a position to say that this was some type of a reconnaissance tour, but either he was taking these photos for some type of reconnaissance, or we've got a stair aficionado in our midst. And he was just, like when he's not doing insurrection, this guy is also just admiring the beauty of stairs. So what was ironic about that too is Loudermilk had initially stated that he had never given a tour of the Capitol on January 5th, 2021. And then once that video was revealed, he was asked, I think it was by CNN, I can't remember the outlet, but he was asked about this exact same thing before. He was asked, why were these people taking photos? With the subtext being taking photos of something that you just days ago didn't even remember happening. And he was like, oh, you know what? In fact, they were taking photos of that specific stairwell because there are these beautiful sconces that they were just appreciating and admiring. So to go from not even remembering, quote unquote, that you even gave a tour in the first place to, yes, that tour was so ingrained in my mind that I can remember the individual sconce that these people were taking pictures of. It's just like the peak of irony here. So that was the Loudermilk situation. One more thing on that. Like, I know that it begs a few questions, you know, like, what are you trying to hide? Why did you lie about that in the first place? But also, how dumb do you have to be as Barry Loudermilk to not think that those videos are going to be revealed? You're taking a tour of people through the U.S. Capitol. This isn't some, like, the docks out in the middle of nowhere where there may or may not be some camera for miles and miles. You're in the most photographed, videotaped area probably in the world. And you think giving a tour of people is going to be discreet enough that you can actually go on TV and lie about it and no one will be any the wiser? So that's the Loudermilk situation. I said this in my video that I did about this yesterday, and I'll say it again now. They may be dangerous, but no one ever said that they were smart. May be dangerous, no one ever said that they were smart. I said this in my video yesterday too. It's like, you don't come to like a rally or some political movement with a weapon, which is like what in reference to that flagpole with like the shiv on top of it, if you don't think you're going to use it. And at the last political event that I went to was to see Katie Porter, and I came with a chocolate chip muffin. And meanwhile, these guys go to their rallies with homemade shivs on the end of flagpoles. So I think, you know, I don't think that this is a normal thing to bring to a rally. I don't think most people think about what weapons they can carry with them, and I don't think that you do that stuff, bring that kind of stuff, if you don't have an intention of actually using it. Today we should be hearing from. We should be hearing about Mike Pence. I think that'll be the focus of today's hearing. By the way, if you have questions that you want me to answer, we've got less than an hour until this hearing begins. If you got questions that you want me to answer, just throw them in the chat and I'll try to answer them. I know that we have plenty of time. I'll try to answer all of these questions. Oh yeah. For people just joining, just was speaking about Barry Loudermilk's. Just to like sum it up in one sentence, Barry Loudermilk had come out in the days, I think on June 14th, so 2 days ago, and said, and actually came onto Twitter and tweeted, "The truth will always prevail. And as I've said since the January 6th committee made their baseless accusation about me in the media, I never gave a tour of the Capitol on January 5th, 2021. The very next day, the January 6th committee released video of Barry Loudermilk giving a tour of the Capitol on January 5th, 2021. So when he, tweeted that, it was obviously all a lie, but he was honest about one thing, and that was the very first sentence: the truth will always prevail. It's like a warning to himself, in a way. He's like, listen, Barry, you'll always be exposed. With that said, I never gave a tour of the Capitol on January 5th, 2021. Okay, I'm going to go into the chat here and see if I can answer some questions. Yeah, who doesn't go to a rally with zip ties, baseball bats, and bear spray? There's a good point. Like I said, I went to the last Katie Porter event a few months ago with a muffin. Armed with a muffin. Update on who disabled the panic button in Ayanna Pressley's office. I haven't heard anything about that. I'm sure the January 6th committee will be looking into those allegations as well. Yes. He tried to make the distinction. It wasn't a tour of the Capitol. It was a tour of some, office building. So Barry Loudermilk was just, parsing words. He was like, well, I never said it was a tour of the Capitol. Wink, wink, wink. What time does it start? We should be starting in about 55 minutes from now. So 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. We have some people joining from exotic Maryland again. Obviously, that's for people that weren't following the stream last time. I was naming all of the exotic locations around the world where people were watching from, like New Zealand and the UK. We had people from Canada and the Netherlands, and I saw Maryland, and so I was like, and Maryland, the exotic getaway of Maryland. Oh, now we have a lot of people from the chat saying we're from. We have people watching from. I'll just take a second on this, and then we'll get into the into the breakdown here, from France and Holland, Costa Rica, Germany, Denmark, a bunch from Denmark, Canada, Australia, Berlin. Someone asks, is the UK exotic? For our intents and purposes, UK... Look, I called Maryland exotic, so the UK is exotic. Oklahoma. Okay, so let's get into what I think is the most effective points of these hearings so far, and that is that the committee very, very, very smartly has begun these hearings by showing taped depositions under oath of these senior administration officials, all conceding to the fact that they had told Trump that there was no fraud in this election and that there was no path to victory for him. We've heard stuff like that from Bill Barr, from Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, from Alex Cannon, who is a lawyer, from Jason Miller, who is a campaign spokesman, all of them admitting under oath, because they had to in these depositions, that they knew that there was no fraud, that there was no evidence of fraud, that they had discussed this with Trump so that he was aware of it. So I think why that was so smart is because Trump then took that information, disregarded it, and moved forward with the big lie anyway. Moved forward with trying to pressure Pence into not certifying the election results. He moved forward with inviting state legislators to refuse to send the proper slate of electors for the winning candidate. He moved forward with trying to pressure elections officials like Brad Raffensperger not to certify the election results. He moved forward with, like I said, peppering his supporters and inciting them to come to the U.S. Capitol with tweets like "it'll be wild," and ultimately to stage their coup. And why this was so important is because he knew the truth and yet opted to do it anyway. He was told by these people. He was told by Bill Barr. He was told by Ivanka. He was told by Jason Miller and Alex Cannon, and yet made the conscious decision to disregard those facts that he knew and still pretend that he had won the election and that he needed to do all this stuff to try to overturn the election results. And why that was so important is that it proves that his intent was corrupt, because he was told the truth already. He's going to argue at some point in his defense that he believed that this was the truth, that he had won the election. But his argument's going to be really hard to make if you have all of these people like Barr, like Cannon, like Miller, like Ivanka, like Kushner, under oath, because they couldn't lie at that point, under oath, admitting to the fact that they already told him the truth. So you can't just feign ignorance and pretend that what happened didn't actually happen. You can't just say, okay, even though everybody surrounding me had told me that there was no way that I could win, that I still believed I could win. Otherwise, he could just claim that forever, right? But you can't claim ignorance when all of these people are under oath, are already on the record, having said that they told him the truth. And so I think that was really smart, because what it shows is that everything that happened subsequent to that, everything that followed those days where they told him that he had no path to victory and that there was no fraud in this election, everything that followed was just fraudulent. It was him defrauding the American people, which is like felonious behavior. So I think very, very, very smart for the January 6th committee to lay that foundation for this whole investigation, to lay the foundation that he was told right off the bat, immediately, the truth, and everything that followed was him making the conscious decision to lie to people, to defraud people, even though he had known the reality of the situation. So perfectly orchestrated, very methodical by the January 6th committee. Of course, also hurting Trump's claims that there was fraud in the election is that at no point were they able to actually prove any fraud in the last election. There were 65 court cases where they tried to prove fraud or some element of fraud. They won one. That's it. It was shortening the cure deadline in Pennsylvania from 9 to 6 days. That's it. Had no outcome, no bearing on the results of that election. Otherwise, they lost 64 out of 65 court cases. There were no secretaries of state who found any evidence of fraud, no Republican governors who found any evidence of fraud. They did a number of recounts and audits stemming from legitimate hand recounts all the way to like insane lunatic recounts from some organization like the Cyber Ninjas out in Arizona. What I think is especially ironic about that is that you have these Republican operatives who aren't real auditors doing these audits, and even in those audits, Trump lost. And not only lost, but I think Biden actually gained votes in their audit, which is not to say that you should believe those audits, because you shouldn't, because they're not real auditors. But even the sham process that was solely intended to show that Trump had actually won an election that he lost, even that actually hurt him even more. So there was no recounts or no audits that proved anything other than the fact that the original counts were correct. And so regardless of how you cut it and who you speak to, whether it's governors, secretaries of state, recounts, audits, or any of these judges, including I think 8 judges who Trump himself appointed, there was no evidence of fraud. And in fact, not only was there no evidence of fraud, but there was evidence of Trump trying to steal the election. We have his conversation with Brad Raffensperger, where he told him to find 11,780 votes, exactly one more vote than he lost by. Just one more vote, as if like wasn't even trying to make it discreet. Not even like, hey, let's give me a few thousand more than I need just to like make it seem legit. Just one single vote. Just get me over the finish line. I want it to seem as obvious as possible. I want it to seem like I took this, like I stole this election. I just want one single more vote that you could find in a suitcase somewhere, while I'm out here claiming that suitcases are full of ballots are being found. It's like the ultimate irony. He's like, we think that there are suitcases of ballots being dragged out from under tables. With that said, we would like you to find exactly one single vote more than the one we actually needed. Pull it out of a suitcase. Thank you, by the way. I see people are donating in the chat. I really do appreciate that. Thank you so much. So we have evidence of him trying to steal by looking at, his conversation with Brad Raffensperger. We obviously know that he tried to invite state legislators to the White House. I think it was the speaker of the Michigan State House came to the White House. We have him trying to pressure Mike Pence into refusing to certify the election results. Pence, of course, has only a perfunctory role. His job is not to... The idea that the sitting vice president would be able to unilaterally decide whether or not the opposition won the last election is so divorced from reality and so asinine that it's actually perfectly on point for what Trump was trying to do, but it bears no basis in reality. I mean, like, Pence's role was solely perfunctory. He doesn't have the ability to decide whether unilaterally he should or shouldn't, count the electoral votes or just decide to send them back to the states. And then, of course, we have John Eastman's memo on how to do a coup. John Eastman, of course, I was saying earlier in the chat, so I know that people who just joined may not know this, but John Eastman was the person who was conspiring to figure out ways so that Mike Pence wouldn't have to certify the election results. That was his job in all this. He's currently under investigation for to see if he'll be disbarred for his involvement in this insurrection. He also had otherwise unknown, or as of yesterday, unknown conversations with Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife. So the January 6th committee, I had mentioned this earlier in the stream, but the January 6th committee has, as of today, as of about an hour ago, invited Ginny Thomas to come speak to the committee about her involvement, which is a major update here and a good move for this committee, because the idea that the wife of a sitting Supreme Court justice who will and has ruled on cases like this involving the January 6th insurrection and the 2020 election, and has actually been like the sole dissenting vote in these matters, that you have the significant other, the wife of a sitting Supreme Court justice, who's like conspiring with these whack job lawyers to undermine the election results and steal the election. We also have proof that Ginny Thomas was emailing members of state legislators, I think like 29 so far, about trying to pressure them into standing up for this country and not certifying the election results and not, going quietly in the face of these evil socialist Democrats who are trying to, who are committing the cardinal sin of winning an election and deigning to take power in an election that they've won. So anyway, we have evidence of John Eastman. I'm sure we'll hear plenty about John Eastman. He's going to be a central figure in these investigations by the January 6th committee. And of course, we have PowerPoints that these Republican operatives have put together. We have a guy named Phil Waldron who put together a brief to members of Congress and called on Trump to use the National Guard to seize voting machines. And he did it in a PowerPoint. Like not even trying to be use Signal. Use like a private messaging service, not a PowerPoint that you're going to blast onto the side of some building and be like, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to have Trump declare martial law and seize all the voting machines, but keep it on the hush-hush, other than the giant PowerPoint that I just put together for all you guys. And of course, we know that all of these people who were publicly pressuring their Republican base to not believe the election results, privately, they didn't believe any of it. I mean, we've reported numerous times about all of the texts that were sent to Mark Meadows from Republican members of Congress, from Fox personalities like Brian Kilmeade, Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, all of whom during the insurrection were texting Mark Meadows, Trump's chief of staff, and saying he's got to call them off, he's got to stop this, he's destroying his own legacy, we've worked so hard for this. This is like Fox News hosts were saying he's destroying this for us, we've worked so hard for this. Even Don Jr. texted Mark Meadows, which is just excellent, because the idea that Don Jr. has to text like a go-between to talk to his own dad is just perfect. And definitely isn't proof that his dad doesn't love him. Definitely not proof of that. So, if all of these people were texting Mark Meadows for Trump to stop this insurrection from happening, while simultaneously going out there and saying, we think this is Antifa, we think this is a false flag, we think this is actually law enforcement, we think this is the FBI. If they actually believe that it was Antifa, law enforcement, or the FBI, or some false flag operation, why would they want Trump to denounce it if he had nothing to do with it? Or if these people were Antifa, why would Antifa listen to him if they weren't summoned by him? Why would Trump need to go out and tell Antifa to go home? Why would Trump need to go out and tell law enforcement to go home? Why would Trump need to go out and tell the FBI to go home? If they really believed that it was all those people who were doing this insurrection, why were they so adamant that Trump talked to them? They're obviously not going to listen to Trump. And of course, it's because they didn't believe the shit that they were saying. They were just looking for some excuse to absolve him of any and all guilt. Now, the committee will move forward with this investigation, and will hopefully, get some accountability, which I think is, for me, is the most important thing. But I think also what's going to be important here is that it's not just about the events of January 6th, it's also about stopping this from happening in the future. I've said it before that January 6th wasn't a one-off, it was a blueprint. Republicans have already fixed a bunch of the problems that landed them here, that prevented them from actually stealing the election in the first place. Thanks to legislation like SB 202 in Georgia, Republicans have made it so that they could take over local elections boards and replace a lot of Democratic run elections boards with Republicans, including, I think there was one local elections board in Georgia where it was democratically run, and it was replaced by Republicans, including the chair of the new board, who was an election denier. There's also, speaking of election deniers, they're running these election deniers in a number of swing states. They're running them in positions like not only governor, where we have guys like Doug Mastriano, who is the gubernatorial nominee for the Republicans in Pennsylvania. The guy is run on a platform of, if I am governor and a Democrat wins in an election against Donald Trump, I'm still going to send the Trump slate of electors to Congress. Like, that was his platform, and he won the Republican nomination. Of course, they're running other Secretary of State candidates in a number of swing states. You've got these election deniers running in Michigan and Arizona. I mean, this is a coordinated effort from the Steve Bannons of the party all the way up to Donald Trump. So, now they're working on fixing a lot of the issues, which is why I'm hitting this idea over and over and over again of this election being so important, because this is the one where they can establish a foundation where they'll be able to deny election results in 2024. So, like, I know that the common thing for midterms is that we don't see turnout that comes nearly as close as presidential year turnout. But if presidential year turnout, if the presidential race is going to be important to you or people that you know, and you think it's not worth it to show up to this one because you're definitely totally going to show up to the next one, just know that the next one is going to be severely impacted by what happens at this one in 2022. So I think it's especially important that we keep hammering this idea that these midterms, yes, are important for 2022, and for making sure that that in the states especially we have blocks against Republican efforts to keep expanding the proliferation of guns into the streets and women's reproductive rights and all of that, which are insanely important, but also because we don't want them to have a House of Congress where they can then refuse to accept any win by someone who isn't Donald Trump. I think what's important here, like what will be especially important, is that, and I think what we're seeing right now, is that the answer isn't to hope for some Republican epiphany in all of this, because there won't be one. They're not going to suddenly embrace democracy, because the fact is that they can't win in a democratic system. They are a shrinking party. They're too white, they're too old, they're too Christian, they're too conservative, and they're too extreme. And so look at their positions on guns, is that even amid daily mass shootings, rampages in this country, where elementary schools are getting shot up, their answer to all of this is to flood the streets with even more guns, and then wonder aloud why we are the only country in the world who has this many mass shootings. We can look at places, every other country in the world, that have mental health issues and video games and doors and pornography and godlessness and fatherlessness. We are far exceeding the number of mass shootings that those countries have. The only difference is the guns. We have 400 million guns in this country. We have almost half of the world's guns. The issue is the guns, and their answer to that is more guns, which is ironic because they're also getting paid by the gun lobby. The gun lobby is paid, just in this cycle alone, over 200 Republicans, $971,000. And it's because all of their answers, not so surprisingly, involve just more guns for people. It's saying, okay, we have mass shootings in schools, we need to arm all the teachers, which means sell more guns. We have mass shootings in supermarkets, well, we definitely need to arm all the cashiers, which means sell more guns. We have mass shootings at concerts, well, there's security guards and ushers, we need to arm them, which means sell more guns. Any way you cut it, the answer always just so happens to be selling more guns, which just kind of goes to show that when you are bought and paid for by these lobbies who solely exist to sell more guns, then your answer is always going to be to sell more guns. That's who's in charge right now. That is their position. It is not a popular position in this country. More than 2/3 of Americans believe that we need to do something about the guns. Every single gun safety measure has the majority of support in this country, and yet you can have stuff like universal background checks and blocking 18, 19, and 20-year-olds from buying assault weapons. You can have 60-70% of Americans who support that and 0% of Republicans. And so that asymmetry there is just indicative of the fact that these people aren't answerable to their constituents. They're just focused on kowtowing to the people who pay them. That's their position on guns. Obviously, their position on abortion is well known. 70% of Americans support Roe as it stands. Meanwhile, you have all these Republicans passing laws in the states saying that even in cases of rape or incest, that women shouldn't be able to get an abortion. And they're passing these laws all across the country, and they're passing these trigger laws as soon as we hear this decision from the Supreme Court officially gutting Roe. And of course, healthcare. Republicans have voted more than 77 times, I think, to gut Obamacare, giving healthcare to 20 million more Americans. So any way you cut it, this is a party that has positions that only have the support of like 25 or 30% of Americans. the reason that they can espouse these positions is they are not afraid of losing because of the ways that they've been able to undermine the democratic process. That is why they're so hell-bent on gerrymandering these states, is because if they can gerrymander their districts and choose which voters elect for them instead of having the voters choose which elected officials represent them, then they can create these districts where they're all safe. And so you have, all of these extreme Republicans who are passing these extreme laws, and they're in these safe districts because they've just crammed every Democratic voter into vote sinks, basically, that just encompass all the cities. I mean, in some states you have all of the metropolitan areas crammed into one district. And I can't remember any of the states in particular. I mean, if Republicans had their way, they would connect like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, like all across the state. They've done it in other states. So they can't win in a democratic system. That's why the only option here is to move to undermine that system, because if it was truly fair, they know that they would have no future in government. And so that's why their only position isn't on policy. I mean, they'll blow wherever the wind blows. Donald Trump has some like errant synapse fire in his brain, and he says something that becomes the new position, policy position in the entire party. They don't care about any of these policy positions. They'll go wherever the wind blows if they need to. The only thing that they're steadfast on is their disdain for democracy, because truly representative democracy, with that system, they have no future in it. There's no way they'd be able to win. I mean, you can't have, you have elections where 5, 6, 7, 8 million people are voting for one party over the next, where you have millions of votes separating one party over the next. I mean, I think in the last 8 elections, the Republicans have won one popular vote victory. That is not a truly representative system, but it's one that they're entrenched in, and one that they're working very hard to entrench. So with that said, let me just back up. I know that there's a lot of new people here. Just want to answer any questions if you have them, so you can throw them in the chat. And in the meantime, I will say for anybody new that the breaking news as of this morning is that Ginny Thomas has been called to testify in front of the January 6th committee. So she will be hopefully comply with that voluntary request. And if not, I expect that and I hope that the January 6th committee will have enough spine to subpoena her, because she was found conspiring with John Eastman, who is obviously the lawyer who was heavily involved in trying to get Pence to use his role as the vice president, as the president of the Senate, to make it so that he couldn't, he wouldn't certify the election results. Somebody had asked when this starts. It starts in about 30 minutes. First hearing should start in about 30 minutes. Also, if you're just tuning in, if you are not yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. I'll be live streaming all of these hearings, So I believe the next one I won't be. It'll be the only hearing that I don't live stream. But in any case, I'll try to live stream every other hearing. I believe we have maybe 5 more. So if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe to this channel. It's free. That is the single best way to support my work. Again, people are asking when this starts. It starts at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Cheryl had asked about a list of pardons and who had requested one. So right now we don't have definitive answers yet on who requested a pardon, other than the January 6th committee coming out and saying that Scott Perry requested a pardon. CNN has also reported that Paul Gosar, Mo Brooks, and Andy Biggs had requested pardons from Trump. I also spoke with Glenn Kirshner about the idea of pardons, and he was just about as close to certain as one could be that Trump had given himself and his inner circle and his family members pocket pardons as well, which of course we wouldn't know about until and unless he's charged with something by the DOJ, at which point he can pull it out and say, I've got a pardon, you can't touch me. That would be challenged in court and unlikely to hold for you to be able to pardon yourself as president for committing a constitutional violation. But I mean, someone much smarter than me would be able to speak on that better than I would. So, yes, I anticipate that we will hear more about pardons. And also for these people who receive pardons, it's also consciousness of guilt. You don't ask for a pardon unless you're conceding that you've done something wrong. And so for all of these Republican lawmakers, just like Trump, who spread the big lie and came out to these rallies and incited this crowd to go storm the Capitol, they knew the truth as well. They were well aware, just like Donald Trump was aware, just like he was told by Barr and Alex Cannon and Jason Miller and Ivanka, that there was no fraud, that there was no way he could win this election, and yet he chose to do it anyway. Just like he did that, these Republican lawmakers also knew, they were also well aware that there was no path to victory for Trump, and that he didn't legitimately win this election. And the way that you know that is not just because they were told behind and knew all this stuff behind the scenes, but they're asking for a pardon because they knew that they did this all with corrupt intent. You don't ask for a pardon if you legitimately believe that what you're doing is virtuous. So the fact that they did seek pardons is just a testament to the fact that they knew exactly what they were doing was wrong. And they came onto these stages on January 6th and whipped up the crowd to go storm the Capitol, and then immediately turned around and said, I'm going to need a pardon for that. They knew exactly what they were doing was wrong. A pocket pardon. Somebody asked, what's a pocket pardon? It would be hidden, so they wouldn't have to come out and say that they got a pardon. It's called a pocket pardon. So we won't know whether Trump granted himself a pardon until he pulls one out, or until any of these people who've been granted a pocket pardon pull them out. And then, of course, those pardons would be challenged. But there were some pardons that are public, and then if it's not public, then it would be a pocket pardon. Will Clarence Thomas be asked to testify? Highly unlikely. But just the fact that they have Ginny Thomas coming to testify is a huge move and a very good thing. Because again, if there was any equivalent to Ginny Thomas on the left, dear God, we would be hearing Tucker Carlson's like fascist cackle on a nightly basis, just ringing in our ears over and over and over again about how we have to call this person to testify, how the husband or significant other should be impeached off the court, how they aren't fit to serve, blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, Ginny Thomas is conspiring and emailing with John Eastman, who's the guy responsible for getting Mike Pence to not certify the election results, and we're just going to pretend that's okay, would be like the peak of fecklessness. So good on the January 6th committee for calling her to testify. If and when she chooses not to, I really, really, really hope that they are prepared to subpoena her. Just this idea, like this asymmetry that like we have to play by the rules and we have to like have civility and respect the boundaries of this is, do you know who this woman is? I'm the wife of a Supreme Court justice. When what she's doing is just like overt election theft corruption out in broad daylight, emailing dozens of members of state legislatures to not certify the election. Are you kidding me? How can the president pardon himself? He does have the ability to pardon anybody. So there's a lot of like scholarly debate as to whether he can. It's never been tried before, obviously. But I'm sure we would see all of that challenged in court. How does this does this end up helping Cheney in the long run? Cheney will likely lose her seat in Wyoming, but I mean, like, how does it help her in the long run? Sleeping at night? Like, protecting American democracy? Look, I agree with Cheney on nothing. Damn near nothing. And in fact, I think she has a voting record with Trump in like the high 90th percentile. But this is what people are going to remember her for. This is going to be her legacy. And we need Republicans so that they can't say this is a sham partisan committee. We have people like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger who are willing to step up and do the right thing. And they're both going to lose their jobs for it. But this is bigger than their jobs. I mean, it's their jobs. Who cares? Like, they'll lose what are they not? They're rich. They'll be fine. Like this idea that they have to do, like, that any of these Republicans at all costs have to do whatever it takes to keep their job, to keep their 2-year term in Congress, and if that means subverting the entirety of the election, so be it. It's just so asinine and so like self-serving and narcissistic and short-sighted. And yet, I think we found 2 people on the right who aren't willing to do it. If the president could pardon himself, does that mean one man would be above the law? In theory, yeah, which is why this would likely be challenged. And that was Jamie Raskin's That was Jamie Raskin's principal beef against the self-pardon, is that no one person could be above the law in this country. And so by basically giving yourself a get-out-of-jail-free card and then turning around and violating the Constitution and defrauding the United States and conspiring to commit seditious, activity, it would be placing him above the law. It would be him absolving himself of any and all guilt for all of these crimes. And so, yeah, that's why it would be highly unlikely that this would hold up in any court. But again, there's smarter people than me on these issues. I will be interviewing Jamie Raskin at some point when these hearings are over, and so I'll be able to ask him exactly that. So if you want to hear that answer, subscribe to this channel, because I will have people like Jamie Raskin on in the near future. And I do hope to get some of these Republicans on the committee. I do hope to get Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger on as well. I have interviewed Adam Kinzinger in the past, trying to get him again. This week I'll be speaking with Senator Chris Murphy, who spearheaded the gun legislation, the first piece of gun legislation that we've had in 30 years. So again, just give me a subscribe, and you'll be able to hear that interview, watch that interview as soon as it drops. Why not subpoena Trump? Unlikely that he would show up, and that would take all of the attention away from everything else that they're doing. Pretty much suck all the oxygen out of the room. I think we can all admit that if Trump did go, the amount of obfuscation, the amount of that we would contend with, like even just trying to get him there would be a nightmare, and it would be all that anybody's talking about. And right now we're able to talk about all of the other important stuff. I mean, they've been doing this investigation for months and months and months. They've spoken to 1,000 witnesses. They've looked through tens and tens and tens of thousands of documents, and we're able to hear from people like Bill Barr, like Jason Miller, like Alex Cannon, like Ivanka and Jared, even White House counsel Hirschman, and find out all of this really relevant information about what happened in the days prior to January 6th and subsequent to January 6th. That would all be overshadowed by like Donald Trump and his like shitstorm of that he brings with himself everywhere. So I think that's why they've not opted to subpoena him. I'll still answer more questions as you throw them into the chat. As of right now, we've got about 20 minutes until it begins. And yes, while I'm waiting for questions, also hit the subscribe button if you're not yet subscribed, and also throw a like onto the stream as well. I think that helps the engagement. Blah blah blah. Somebody asked what happened to the new studio. I am getting a new studio. We're probably it's gonna happen probably at the end of this summer. So the infamous white wall will be going away and replaced. And I will save all of your eyes who are watching this, who are watching my videos at night, because I know it hurts. But it's like a good pain, a good hurt. How many more hearings are there? I believe there are either 4 or 5. Okay, so Sherry asked, can you explain how Republicans can arbitrarily replace Democrats in slates of electors is what you're referring to. So basically, you have votes that are cast, and those votes, depending on which party gets more of those votes, is the slate of electors for either, if it's Biden or Trump, the slate of electors for Biden is sent to Congress, or the slate of electors for Trump is sent to Congress. Every state has to abide by the will of the voters in terms of which slate of electors are cast. And that's because, you see that California has 55 electoral votes. There's going to be 55 Biden electors or 55 Trump electors. It's the electoral college system. It's stupid. But the states have to abide by the will of the voters in their state. And so if more people vote for the Democrat, then that Biden slate of electors is sent to Congress. If Trump wins, then the Trump slate of electors is sent for the Republicans. And Republicans are just seeking ways to say, okay, well, we're going to try to go around the system. And even if Biden won, we're going to claim that there's too many irregularities, and so the decision is thrown back to the state legislatures, who could then just decide to send a separate slate of electors for the opposite party. And so, yes, it's confusing. It's meant to be confusing. It's not a real thing, and the whole point is to like obfuscate the facts enough that this could actually happen. There's no way that this is based in any semblance of legality. Does this all go for naught, Douglas asks, if Merrick Garland and the DOJ does not do their job, and you said appoint a special prosecutor? I don't think you'd need a special prosecutor. Merrick Garland and the DOJ are perfectly capable of charging Trump if they think that there's, reason to charge Trump, which I think this January 6th committee is laying out their case for doing so perfectly. But yes, to answer your question, I think like if you have the January 6th committee that so effectively is proving their case against Trump, that you have all of these witnesses who are coming forward, senior Trump administration officials like Bill Barr, Alice Cannon, Jason Miller, Ivanka, Hirschman, who are all admitting that Trump knew that there was no fraud in the election and knew there was no path to victory, and yet he chose to move forward with the big lie anyway, and chose to push for the election to be overturned anyway, and did this all with corrupt intent because he knew the truth. I think laying that case out so effectively and methodically, and then looking at Merrick Garland and the DOJ and them not doing anything, will be even worse, because now we're seeing this thing proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. And so if the DOJ and Merrick Garland don't do their job after this, yes, that would be not only like a massive abdication of their duties as like law enforcement officials, but I mean, it'll just show that it's just the peak of fecklessness on the left, that you have a guy who could commit such brazen criminal acts and get away with it. That's what that'll show. So yeah, I think there's a huge danger in the DOJ and Merrick Garland not doing their job. Couldn't Biden replace Garland if he's not doing his job, like Trump did whenever he didn't like what his AG was doing? Yeah, he has the ability to, but the whole point of what Biden is doing with Merrick Garland is saying like, okay, I'm going to restore our faith in the DOJ in terms of having, independent prosecutors give their recommendation to the Attorney General, who will then decide whether or not to move on that recommendation, and it's completely divorced from partisan politics. That was his whole MO in terms of naming Garland, because he's like this judicious, judge. I mean, he's a judge. So couldn't he replace Garland if he's not doing his job? Yeah. Would he replace Garland? It would go against Biden's entire MO in terms of naming him, and kind of undermine his whole idea of let's bring in, restore faith in the DOJ and have this independent prosecutor who's going to do his job regardless of political pressure. So would I expect it to happen? No, not at all. Okay, it looks like the feed is beginning. We're about 15 minutes out. So again, don't worry yet. We still have a little bit of time. I'll continue to answer any questions that you have. Why do we still have the Electoral College? Isn't it too antiquated to be used correctly, especially with our politicians? We have the Electoral College because one party benefits from its use, because it helps entrench the power of the minority party, and so the minority party has a very vested interest in keeping that system, because without it, if it was just one person, one vote, they wouldn't be able to win. That's why we have the Electoral College still. In fact, it was all started with this idea that it would help smaller rural slave-owning states. That was the basis on which the Electoral College was first adopted, and that's why it still exists today, because those same rural conservative states still want outsized impact in our decisions. What do we expect from today's hearing? We should expect to hear about Mike Pence at today's hearing. I think that'll be a major focus. Obviously, a lot of new information has come out in the last few days, especially with regard to Ginny Thomas, for example. So we may or may not hear more about that. Yes, for people joining in, it's a suit day. That's because I didn't wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning. We have a 1 p.m. Eastern stream, 10 a.m. Pacific. Somebody asked what the end goal is. The end goal is pretty simple. I mean, it's to help lay out this case for the American people, hopefully apply some pressure to the DOJ to then see all this criminality that's happening, and hopefully, see some charge get passed down onto Trump or those in his inner circle. If the DOJ was investigating this alone, A, they wouldn't have as many resources as they have now thanks to the January 6th committee, and B, the American people would have, and the rest of the world would have no insight into it because the DOJ isn't going to isn't going to do hearings like this. So it's really twofold, but it's massively beneficial. Somebody asked, wouldn't replacing Garland be like firing his first AG and FBI director? Yeah, I mean, it would be seen as that. And what's the ultimate irony of that is that all of those on the right would like clutch their pearls and have fainting spells over the idea that Biden would ever replace some official who wasn't following what he wanted to see done, even though Trump did it like 6 times. And Trump literally fired FBI directors and attorneys general numerous times, and so that wouldn't stop them from, like I said, feigning outrage and having fainting spells on a daily basis. I mean, that would be all we heard from Fox News, because as far as they would be concerned, all of their knowledge on government has just started on January 20th, 2021. And everything that happened before that with Donald Trump miraculously disappeared, conveniently disappeared. Should we protest if Garland doesn't do anything? Yeah, probably. We'll see. I mean, it does seem like a bunch of people in the chat are saying DOJ is not going to do anything, but we'll see. Look, I can't say one way or the other what's going to happen. I don't know. So all I can say is that, we'll wait for this investigation to finish. Obviously, the January 6th committee hearings are placing a lot of pressure on the DOJ, and that's why it's so important that people watch. The more people that are aware of this stuff, the more people that can then say, like, this guy needs to be charged, these people need to be charged for what they've done, because, like, we all see the proof. We know that there were his senior administration officials who told him the truth, and yet he opted to lie anyway and to incite a coup anyway, and he did it with criminal intent. And so, where are my glasses from? They're from Warby Parker. Free commercial for Warby Parker. Thank you, by the way, for people giving donations. I do appreciate it. We are about 9 minutes away from this hearing beginning. So stick around. If you're in here, stick around. Somebody asked again, will Trump have to testify? Unlikely. That would take all the oxygen out of the room and focus it on Trump. Although it would be interesting if he testified, because he's not capable of telling the truth. And then people would say, like, okay, well then charge him for lying to Congress. But, like, the problem isn't having charges against Trump. Like, we have those. So it's not to, like, bring him to the committee and then he'll lie to the committee and commit perjury or lying to Congress, which is a felony, and then, like, wait for the DOJ to charge him. We have something with which we can charge Donald Trump. It's just a matter of whether they're going to do it. So we don't need to, like, do this and risk another charge when we don't even know if the DOJ is going to charge him for the first thing. So I think that's the main goal here, is that we just need the DOJ to charge him for what we already know he did that was illegal. Someone asked if there's a link between the Proud Boys document 1776 returns and Lauren Boebert's tweet today is 1776. I don't know. I can't say for sure. There's obviously a lot of, like, interesting similarities between all of this verbiage. I'm sure that they're looking into it. People like Lauren Boebert were tweeting out the location of high-level Democrats during this insurrection. I don't know. I mean, this is something that I'm sure the DOJ is looking into. We won't have any insight into it. We may not, but I just can't say definitively. But it's not off the mark. I mean, it's not, what would your suggestion be to pressure the DOJ to act? I think it would just be, first of all, tuning into these hearings, I think is especially important, because I think Republicans are relying on people not caring. And yet they look at the numbers for these hearings, which was, the first one was 20 million just on the major networks, doesn't include streaming at all. The second one was over 11 million, which for a morning, that thing started 7 a.m. Eastern, for a morning hearing, for a morning congressional hearing, to get more than like an episode of the World Series was massive. So I think people continuing to tune in, getting those numbers up, and just showing, just by virtue of being there, that people are interested is hugely important, and people see that. If no one was watching these hearings, if they had like a few 100,000 viewers, just like a regular night of cable or whatever, then I think it would be one thing, and it would just kind of like lend itself to this idea that people are over it. But the fact that we have so many people paying attention is a message to, the DOJ, for example, that people are paying attention, that people see what's going on, that they care about it. So that would be my suggestion, is just to keep staying involved and just keep staying active and pay attention to this stuff, because that in and of itself helps. I think also, call elected officials, tweet about this stuff. I know people think that it doesn't matter, but pressure is important, and building that pressure is important. There's a reason in these social media ecosystems on the right that they hammer these messages home and they catch fire. And that's why a lot of these messages stick, even though they're completely ridiculous messages. But I think it's just as important that we don't just give up and say oh, well, nothing's going to happen, so screw it, I'm not going to say anything. I do think there is power that comes from continuing to keep this stuff in the public consciousness. What's Garland going to do if a coup attempt happens again and is successful? And multiple members of Congress die as a result? Yeah, that's the whole point. Like I said, this isn't just about accountability for these people who have committed this stuff in the first place, in the past. It's about preventing it from happening in the future. If these people see that there is no accountability and that you can kind of have carte blanche to say whatever you want and nothing's gonna happen, then of course they'll be emboldened to do it again. They say we have a clear runway to just lie to all of our supporters and incite an insurrection and try to get them to block certification of the election so that we win and nothing happens. Of course we're going to do it again in 2022 and 2024. Of course, nothing happens. It's not even a crime. Why not? If our only goal is to take power, and when we do whatever is necessary to try and take power and nothing happens to prevent us from doing that, you think they're not going to do it again? Of course, and that would be on Garland and the DOJ. Is there evidence that Garland is pursuing these charges? Yeah, there's evidence that he is. He's called people to the DOJ to testify for any information pertaining to Trump. So that would suggest that the DOJ is looking into Trump. Otherwise, why would the DOJ be requesting information related to Trump? So yeah, there is information. There is evidence that would suggest that Garland's pursuing these charges. What ultimately happens remains to be seen. Can the lawyer that developed the scheme, that's John Eastman, can he be charged? Yeah, he could be charged. Again, whether he actually does remains to be seen. But yes, to answer your question, John Eastman could be charged for his involvement in this scheme, especially, I'm sure that we're going to hear a lot about John Eastman, if not in this hearing, at some point in these hearings. He's going to be a central figure in these hearings. We'll know what he knew. I'm sure the January 6th committee will try to show that he was well aware that what he was selling was complete bullshit, but that he pushed it anyway. And then he'll be in the same boat where you move forward with these schemes with corrupt intent because you know the truth, because you were told the truth by experts and senior administration officials and White House counsel, and opted anyway to disregard all that stuff because your only goal is to just try to steal an election. Thank you, by the way, for people joining as members on the channel. I do appreciate that a lot. It's not necessary. The best way to support me is to subscribe to the channel if you're not yet subscribed. But for the people who are getting memberships, I really appreciate that. That's highly appreciated, so thank you. How can we end gerrymandering? That's a good question. We would end gerrymandering by electing 2 more Democratic senators who are willing to eliminate the filibuster, we would in turn be able to pass some type of voting legislation that would make gerrymandering illegal. So we have to hold the House, hold the Senate, and add 2 senators so we have enough people to eliminate the filibuster. So we should be starting this hearing any moment now. The committee should be entering at any moment. So we'll stand by for that to happen. Again, one last time, if you haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe to this channel. Best way to support me is to subscribe. Somebody asked what happened to No Tie with Brian Tyler Cohen. So I have a podcast called No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, and the other day for the second hearing, I wore a hoodie because it was like 4:30 in the morning when I woke up. So it was No Tie with Brian Tyler Cohen. Well, I had time to put clothing on today. All right, committee members are making their way in, led by Benny Thompson. Today we'll be hearing from 2 former advisors for Mike Pence as witnesses. So again, this committee will focus on Mike Pence. By the way, that is a good point. If you do listen to podcasts, please subscribe to my podcast, No Lie, with Brian Tyler Cohen. It's on every podcast player. Wow, okay, so pretty importantly, the last thing we just found out is Jason Miller admitted that Trump dictated the statement that he and Pence were in, quote, total agreement that Pence had the power to act. Obviously, completely false, because Donald Trump knew, not only because of his other conversations with people, but because of conversations that he had just prior between their staff, where they made abundantly clear, where you hear Mark Short say and make abundantly clear that they weren't in agreement, that Pence didn't agree with this idea that he could unilaterally refuse to certify the election results. Other powerful points from this first part of this hearing today. We just recently heard Trump say the quote, and this was to Mike Pence, "I don't want to be your friend anymore if you don't do this." And that was said by Donald Trump, who is a full-grown man. And he said that to Mike Pence, who is also a full-grown man, about trying to get him to help him steal a free and fair election. So just in case you were wondering what the level of discourse was going on, it was basically the Washington D.C. equivalent of, "You're not coming to my birthday party and we're going to have cosmic bowling and you don't get to participate in that." Going to Judge Ludig, who was the judge that was speaking very slowly earlier today. I think clearly Judge Ludig is not the ideal witness generally, just because he's not very compelling, and he says about 9 words a minute. But I think the important part in terms of why he came is because he's highly respected in conservative circles. He is Ted Cruz's mentor. He was someone for whom John Eastman clerked, which is especially important. So to have John Eastman, who clerked for Judge Ludig, and then Judge Ludig to come out and basically just denigrate this entire plan by John Eastman, is as impactful as it can get, if of course you care about that kind of stuff. For people who care that John Eastman, isn't a piece of shit, who care about what people say, this would in theory have a big impact. I want to read a couple tweets This is Neil Katyal, who said, "This has to be the nightmare for every federal law clerk ever, having your own judge testify against you in Congress and to have another former clerk ask the questions. I think of the two judges for whom I clerked akin to my parents, and every one of the clerks part of the family." So he's saying like these judges are seen as like these revered figures for them. If you're a clerk, like the judge that you clerked for is like this revered figure. He's saying he sees these judges as akin to his parents and the other clerks as part of his family. So you have a different Ludig clerk, and Ludig himself just basically explaining how John Eastman's like legal theory had no basis in reality. And, you know, one would think, if you're someone who cares about the election theft scheme anyway and who's going to believe this bullshit anyway, this might not impact you. But if you're somebody who cares about this kind of stuff, you know, then this would have something of an impact. Just a couple more that I think, more points I think were important. Eastman himself admitted in an email that the fake slate of electors, quote, had no legal weight and referred to them as, quote, dead on arrival in Congress. So even Eastman himself, who was pushing this scheme forward, knew that this scheme had no validity, like had no legal validity. Which I think is especially important because it just continues to show, one example after the next, how all of these people knew that what they were doing was baseless. It had no legal grounding. All of the people, you know, all of the rest of the people in their orbit had already told them that it had no legal grounding. You have the vice president's team who was conferring with Trump's team, who said that if this idea that the vice president could just unilaterally decide whether or not to allow the election results to move forward was a real thing, why wouldn't any other vice president take advantage of that? If it was a real thing, why wouldn't Al Gore have said like, oh, you know what? Yeah, we might have lost this election, but if I get to choose, screw it. We're president and VP again. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And admittedly from them, this isn't, it wouldn't have gotten even, you know, more than 2 Supreme Court justices. I think they were referring to, of course, Alito and Thomas, who are just, you know, prime examples of you know, jurisprudence excellence. So anyway, but they conceded as well that it would likely fail 9-0. And of course, you know, the Supreme Court had ruled in other cases. I think there was that Texas case where they tried to invalidate the election results in like Michigan, Georgia, maybe Nevada, and Wisconsin, I believe, or Pennsylvania. And the Supreme Court also rejected that case. So this idea that the Supreme Court would just say, you know what, starting now, the vice president just has the unilateral ability to reject the votes of, 81 million people, is just so backwards on its face. And they knew that. Even you know, Eastman himself admitted that this whole plan was complete bullshit. He pushed forward with it anyway because his whole plan was to just try to stage this coup, and he did so with corrupt intent, just like Donald Trump moved forward with his plan with corrupt intent, because all of these people knew the truth. They were told the truth numerous times. That's what this committee is showing over and over and over again, that all these people were told reality, were given the objective reality of what their plan, that their plan like wasn't realistic, that it didn't carry any legal weight, that it was just completely baseless. It didn't pass constitutional muster. It wouldn't pass judicial muster. It wouldn't last in the Supreme Court. It would get laughed out of any courtroom. And yet they chose to move forward anyway. They chose to lie every step of the way and say that Trump had, that there was fraud, for example, or that these state legislators had the ability to refuse to send the proper slate of electors, or that the vice president could refuse to certify the electoral votes, even though they had just spoken to the vice president's staff and they said, no, we are not willing to do this. They pushed forward anyway because their only plan was to just lie about this stuff, to do whatever they can, despite the facts, despite what they knew. So that's where we're at right now. We've got a few minutes left until this committee picks back up. I would ask now, if you're tuning in and watching, if you could please subscribe to my channel. That is the best way to support me. I'll be streaming all of these hearings except one. That's Tuesday's hearing next week. That is the only hearing that I won't be streaming. But I'll stream every other hearing that there is, so if you can please subscribe to my channel, I would appreciate that. It doesn't cost anything. It would just be a major help for me. And you'll get notified whenever these hearings begin. For people that are just tuning in also that may not have heard the early part of like my commentary before this hearing, actually we just have a response right now from John Eastman. John Eastman says, "I can categorically confirm that at no time did I discuss with Mrs. Thomas or Justice Thomas any matters pending or likely to come before the court. We have never engaged in such discussions and did not do so in December 2020. So this is in reference to the fact that there was breaking news yesterday, I believe, from the Washington Post, although don't quote me on that, that Ginny Thomas had discussions with John Eastman. John Eastman, of course, is the lawyer responsible for creating this whole framework that Mike Pence was able to just like unilaterally not accept the slate of electors and like send it back to the states. Well, initially, they had wanted him to just outright reject it, and then they were like, okay, well then at least just send it back to the states. And of course, the states would, there were enough Republican-led legislatures in the states where they could send an alternate slate of electors. So that was their plan for Mike Pence. There was then reporting that Ginny Thomas, who's Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's wife, had conversations with John Eastman. And by the way, this is the same woman who we had also found out in the week prior had sent something like 29 emails to a bunch of Arizona state legislators trying to get them to refuse to certify the election results and to like stand up for your country. And this is the moment where you can fight back against the evil Democrats, blah, blah, blah. So John Eastman just released his statement during this hearing in the last few minutes, and he said, "I can confirm it that at no time did I discuss with Mrs. Thomas or Justice Thomas any matters pending or likely to come before the court." Of course, the only way to be sure about this is if John Eastman actually testifies for the committee. So it'll be interesting to see whether he testifies, and if he doesn't testify, whether they'll subpoena him and enforce that subpoena. Also, whether the DOJ is doing anything with John Eastman in terms of subpoenaing him to come and testify. But this isn't the first time that somebody said something on Twitter and then immediately had that debunked. So I know the committee is now looking into whether Ginny Thomas is going to come and speak to them voluntarily. If not, we'll see what happens next. It would be like a miscarriage of justice if she refuses to comply with a voluntary request to come speak to that committee if they don't then subpoena her. It's basically saying nobody has to comply with our request to come speak to a congressional committee, because we're just gonna like force your hand on everything. So we'll see what happens in terms of like whether they actually exert some pressure and subpoena Ginny Thomas. But her involvement in this is pretty staggering. And if the tables were turned, I think you would have every single Republican and conservative commentator, lawmaker, and media figure calling on an endless loop for some accountability. And Democrats should do exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. It would be insane for us not to. Again, one last time, if you're not yet subscribed and you're watching this and you enjoy my coverage, the best way to support me is to subscribe. So please subscribe to my channel. I would appreciate it. Wow, okay. So, pretty wild hearing today. I just want to go over some of the more important points, and there are a few really important points here. Starting with John Eastman. Again, John Eastman is the lawyer responsible for this whole scheme that would suggest that Mike Pence has the ability to like unilaterally decide not to certify the electoral votes. The fact that Eastman, once he had pushed forward this scheme, the guy then came back and asked for a presidential pardon. And I find that so telling, because like this is proof of consciousness of guilt. He knew that what he was doing was illegal. He knew that what he was doing was corrupt. He knew that what he was doing was criminal. And yet not only pushed forward anyway, but then sent a message in writing asking for a presidential pardon. So sure was he that what he was doing was like steeped in illegality. So I find that like especially remarkable for John Eastman. Also, I found it noticeable that throughout this process, I think when Eastman came to testify, he pled the fifth like, I don't know, I've read somewhere online that he did it close to 100 times. Donald Trump himself said, like, what does it mean when you plead the fifth? Only the mob pleads the fifth. This guy knew exactly what he was doing. Obviously, there is a ton of evidence for the DOJ to charge John Eastman. I'm certain, I shouldn't say certain, I would bet anything that John Eastman was granted some type of a pardon by Trump that we don't know about. If he did, I would just say that it's highly unlikely that anything like that would actually hold up in court, because it's predicated on criminal behavior and violating the Constitution. He said himself, one sentence that I think was so telling, called for one more relatively minor violation of the Electoral Count Act. Because he said, well, the Electoral Count Act was already violated by virtue of there not being 2 hours to debate Arizona's election objections. Of course, there weren't 2 hours of debate for Arizona's election objections because an insurrection had broken out in the chamber where the insurrectionists were looking to murder people. So that's why it was violated. And so he said, well, if you look at that insurrection right there, clearly a violation because they weren't able to do 2 hours of debate on the Arizona objection. And so let's just do, quote, one more relatively minor violation of the Electoral Count Act and do a 10-day delay. And of course, these delays, all they do is allow doubt to set in and, to keep hammering away at this idea that there was election theft. The longer they could wait, the more doubt they would be able to sow. That was the whole point of this. It was just feeding this bullshit narrative that they all knew was bullshit. But Eastman did this in writing. He called for a violation of the Electoral Count Act in writing. Add that to the litany of other things that he's done, just being the architect of this whole scheme to begin with, like the legal mind behind this whole scheme, the person who spoke at the Ellipse that day where they were inciting the insurrectionists to eventually go storm the Capitol. The idea that Eastman should leave this process, at the end of this process, should be free and not rotting in prison for the rest of his life would be the biggest miscarriage of justice that I've ever seen. Like, this guy deserves to spend the rest of his life in jail. That's my thoughts on John Eastman. They are surprisingly similar to my thoughts on Trump, but dear God, this guy doesn't deserve to live a single other day as a free person in this country. I think one notable quote, too, was White House counsel Hirschman had said to Eastman, quote, "Are you out of your effing mind? I only want to hear 2 words coming out of your mouth from now on: orderly transition." He goes on to say, "Now I'm going to give you the best free legal advice you're ever getting in your life. Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer." So again, there are 2 investigations happening at once here. You have the January 6th committee investigation and these hearings that are happening in public, and you have the DOJ investigation. One would imagine that they're working hand in glove, that, for all of these depositions that are happening with the January 6th committee, all of that information is given over to the DOJ. With all of these documents that are being released to the January 6th committee, I'm talking tens and tens and tens of thousands of documents, those are being released to the DOJ. It's important because, this gives the DOJ access to so many more resources that they wouldn't have otherwise had. It's also important because we get to see it, and we get to put pressure onto prosecutors to do the right thing and hold these people accountable. So that's why all of this is so important. I know that people are, thinking like, okay, we already know what happened on January 6th, or, okay, this stuff is happening with regards to January 6th, but nothing's going to come of it anyway. Well, just by virtue of us seeing and being able to apply that pressure, and this stuff getting so much attention and so many views on both TV and on the internet, this is doing that job inherently. Like, this is putting that pressure on the DOJ in real time. So I think that these hearings are super important. I'm glad that people are paying attention. I had 20,000 people on this stream today at one time. So that's a testament to the fact that, which is, by the way, more than I had on the primetime hearing stream. So people are paying attention to this stuff. They care about this stuff. The prosecutors are feeling that pressure. There is no doubt about that. So whether they will then see all of this evidence against Eastman and charge him remains to be seen. But my God, the January 6th committee has laid this case out, has handed it to them on a silver platter. It would be just devastating. Not only to, it would be devastating if Eastman comes out of this in any way being able to walk. That would be a pretty horrific, like I said before, miscarriage of justice. I think something else that was pretty remarkable from this hearing is this whole idea that the vice president, Pence's team, had conferred with Trump's team and told them that they do not agree with this idea that Trump was putting forward with the help of Eastman, that the vice president has the authority to unilaterally disregard the electoral votes that were cast from each state. They made it clear that they don't agree with that sentiment, and the very next day, Trump sent a tweet saying that he and Pence were in total agreement. That's a quote, total agreement, that Pence had the, quote, power to act. And so again, just one more example showing how these people had the facts because they had this conversation. They knew that Pence and Trump were not in total agreement, and yet opted to disregard those facts in order to spread the big lie anyway, in order to suggest that Pence had the power to overturn the election results anyway. And then the other examples, spreading the lie that the state legislators had the ability to send separate slates of electors, spreading the lie that the big lie itself, inciting an insurrection of the camp. All of this was done despite knowing the facts. And so all we get from these hearings over and over and over again are more examples of the fact that the people who were responsible for all of this, what Judge Ludig called constitutional mischief, all of the people who were responsible for that didn't do it because they believed it, even though that'll be their defense. They did it because they were trying to defraud people, and they had corrupt intent because they knew the truth, because they were told the truth. They were told the truth by all of their people surrounding them in their inner circles, and we know that because we're seeing these taped depositions where these people under oath can't lie. And so we know, thanks to these depositions, that Jason Miller and Alex Cannon and Mark Short and Ivanka and Jared, all these people conceded the truth about there being no fraud, about Trump knowing that there was no path to victory, about them having these conversations behind the scenes, and then turning around and publicly saying the complete opposite because they were looking to defraud people. They knew the truth and yet opted to lie anyway. And I think that's the most important thing that this committee can continue hammering home, that they can continue laying out. We're seeing more and more and more of these people who knew the reality of this situation and yet just chose to lie to these people instead, ultimately resulting in a coup attempt at the U.S. Capitol. That's why these committee hearings are so important, and that's why they'll continue to show this stuff. For next committee's hearing, we're going to hear about the state legislators who were called to the White House. We know very little about that other than what we saw publicly, which I believe was the Michigan Senate president, state Senate president, and maybe assembly leader. I might be getting those wrong, those positions, but were called to the White House, of course, which was going to be to discuss the idea of sending an alternate slate of electors or refusing to certify the electoral votes from their state. So we'll hear that in the next hearing, which I believe is Tuesday afternoon. With that said, one last request: if you haven't yet subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. That is the best way to support my work. I'll be streaming these hearings as they continue to happen here. And one last thing is to thank you for watching on this stream. I know there's a ton of places to watch, so I really appreciate you tuning in here and taking my take for what it's worth. So thank you. We'll leave it at that, and just hit the subscribe button and join me for the next live stream here. Thanks so much, everybody.